Hello there, welcome to Love Money Texas. I'm Andrew Johnson.
And Mark Scroggins.
Well, today we're going to be talking about quite a few things in this celebrity divorce arena and then distilling down to some topics that cover asset protection and various intricacies that go into the dividing of assets in divorce. So thank you, Mark, for giving us your wisdom in this topic as always.
You're welcome.
You know, on the divorce front, we have Bill and Melinda Gates. Wow.
Yeah, so that's a new one. And here's what makes it even that much more interesting. So those of y'all who are in Texas that are watching this, Washington is a community property state, okay?
Just like Texas.
Much like Texas. I'm not up to speed on exactly what their laws are there, but you know, community property is very similar all over the place. Or I should say, the limited places that it actually is. There's 6 or 7 states that
where not to get divorced.
Exactly.
Texas,
well, if you're,
Washington.
if you're the well-heeled person, so to speak, or the moneyed partner, yeah, that can be an issue. Although, you know, Texas doesn't have alimony like the nightmares you hear about coming out of California and New York and stuff like that. That, you know, that ain't the case.
How bad does that get in those states with alimony?
Bad.
Okay.
Bad. I mean, so basically,
like majority of income bad? Like,
I don't know that it's
50-50?
I don't know that it's that bad,
okay.
But I mean, it's significant. Okay. It's significant. So, I mean, you could easily have, 50% of your pay going away once you figure in that, as well as child support. I mean, it's just, it's done on a different scale. So for example, and to go down a little tangent for just a minute, in Texas, child support is based on guidelines, okay, that have a cap on it. So right now, that cap is $9,200 a month, okay? So 1 child, 20% of net, 2 children, 25, 3 children, 30, okay, et cetera, et cetera.
So if you're a prolific producer of children,
right,
let's put it that way, you are capped out if you have 10 kids at $9,200.
Well, not $9,200. It is per child, but it is based on a net of $9,200 a month. Okay, so if you're making $1 million a year, obviously your net monthly is more than $9,200 a month. Okay, but it is capped at that unless you can show that the child has certain special needs or certain needs that are not covered by that. So you really have to get kind of into a special needs.
What about like, where would private schooling fall into that category?
It doesn't.
Okay.
It doesn't. So you want to pay for that, you can pay for that. You know, you might get a court that will order that. You know, if the kids have been, like for instance, if the kids have been going to Jesuit or St. Mark's the whole time, or Hockaday or Ursuline, you know, are they going to say that, you know, Dad, you're ordered to do that? Maybe. You know, there's a good chance of that. It depends kind of on the totality of the circumstances.
Or mom.
Yeah, exactly. Or mom. Yeah, or mom's going to pay for that.
Sure.
So,
yep.
You know, I've had plenty of the high wage earner has been a wife on a lot of these cases. But that's something that's very different. So if everybody, you know, maybe not everybody, I remember back, you know, Kemp was a phenomenal basketball player in my day, played for the Seattle Supersonics, okay? Had 7 kids with 7 different women.
All right.
Holy shit, you know, what his child support obligation was, because it's not like, you know, so if you've got 2 kids in Texas out of a marriage, right, you're paying 25% of net, okay? If you've got 2 kids by 2 different baby mamas, okay, it's different. You're paying 20% on one, and you're paying, I can't remember if it's 16.5% or 17.5% on the other one, because you get a reduction for every other child that you're paying. But you can see that it's vastly more than what the other is. So just imagine what that is with 7 different women. So Kemp was one of the highest paid basketball players, you know, at his time in the NBA. He's freaking broke.
Yep, I bet he's on. He was
done.
Episode 2 of 30 for 30 broke.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus Christ, man. I mean, that's you know,
thing for birth control.
No kidding.
Exactly.
Yeah. Put a raincoat on, dude. You know exactly. Good Lord, man.
So what happens if you have 7 different kids from 7 different states?
That is a nightmare, because you're going to have to you're going to fight cases in each one of those states where the kids reside.
Oof.
Yeah. So, hello, 7 different lawyers Or you have one lawyer who makes what is called a pro hoc vice entrance into the other states if they're not
still
admitted
has
to
to hire
practice.
another lawyer in that state.
Absolutely.
To go on his behalf.
Yeah,
That's
exactly. That's somebody that's going to make sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. But yeah, what a freaking mess.
No kidding.
Yeah, so get a vasectomy. That's the deal, man.
Yeah.
Get a vasectomy. If you're done, you know, and you know that you're that kind of, you know, prolific procreator, snip, snip, dude,
Yeah,
and
one
get
of my-
that taken care of.
One of my favorite stories is actually I have a friend here in Dallas, and he's divorced, and he was like, you know what, I'm not doing any more kids, but he's really a younger guy. He's in his late 30s.
Right.
And he went through that procedure, and he was dating a girl for a little while, and she came to him and said, hey, this is your kid.
Yeah.
You have a financial obligation to me now, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, absolutely not. Show me a paternity test.
Right.
And she goes, well, why are you so confident? He goes, I am not able to produce kids anymore. So I know there's always the poke a hole in it mentality with vasectomy can come back, but I digress. So going back to Bill and Melinda, because this is something that's very interesting to me. Talk to us about how you divide a $150 billion estate in a vacuum. I mean, that's got to be, first of all, let's all give a round of applause to the attorney who's presiding over that case. That's going to be pretty epic.
Yeah, so from what I'm seeing, you know, 150 billion, which obviously subject to change on a daily basis. No premarital agreement. Apparently they have signed a separation agreement, okay? So to digress for just a second, no such thing as legal separation in the state of Texas, okay? If you're separated, that just means that you're not living together, right? Okay? You are still creating community property that entire time. So you get separated, and 2 months later, you hit the lottery and you get $300 million. Half. Okay? That's right. Half. Okay,
that would be hilarious.
Yeah,
that'd be very funny.
Just the same thing if you change jobs, you know, and you join the startup that is the next big thing, and it has a crazy IPO, and you've got a 6-month waiting period, and you sign, you know, then you sell a piece of your stock for, you know, 50 million. Community, still community. Okay, so a separation agreement is typically just what I would think. What I'm guessing, okay, and this is just speculation.
This does not exist in Texas.
Well, legal separation does not. It exists in different states. But when they're talking about a separation agreement, I think they are just talking about a marital property agreement, okay? That they've agreed that we're going to split our assets a certain way. So if you don't have something like that, how do you divide it? Man, that's a great question. So what I can tell you is in Texas, the more money that the parties have, the closer to an exact 50-50 division it is going to be, regardless of fault, okay? So in this case, you would really have to do some crazy shit not to get 50%.
That's really interesting, because one would imagine that if you are overwhelmingly the income earner and you've experienced meteoric success while married, and the other person, the non-income earner in that relationship, goes astray, you could make a case to say, tough shit, you're on your own, you're getting 10%, goodbye. I find that fascinating, personally.
You could absolutely make that argument, and then you would pay for their fees, and which are going to be, you know, would be likely astronomical in a situation like that, because that's just not going to happen. And that's not what the law is in Texas. I mean, it just doesn't. For someone to get really, really hammered in Texas, it's going to be a situation where there have been a bunch of fraudulent transfers, okay? So let's say that you've got, just because it's an easy round number, a $10 million estate, okay? And let's say that you knew you were getting divorced, and so you're setting this thing up, all right? And so you start transferring assets, and you're transferring
withdrawing cash.
So where you can see this a lot is when people start transferring stuff overseas, and they're putting money in, they're gifting stuff to relatives, or they're putting stuff in other people's names. And let's just say, for the purposes of argument, that you're able to track all this shit down, okay? Which is very difficult to do. And a lot of the time you can't track everything down. You can track a lot, but you might not be able to track everything. But let's say that you can. And so you make this claim of waste, okay, which means the inappropriate use of funds on, say, a girlfriend or boyfriend, okay, when you were married, or you had a gambling addiction, okay? And so you owed $5 million to Caesars, which I can tell you those boys are going to get the money one way or another at some point.
It's all second only to the IRS.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. And who knows? Are they in cahoots? Nobody knows.
No,
haven't seen them
knows.
together at the same time.
Yeah, the deep state is certainly looking for its funding sources. So, man.
You know, so it's if you can find it, and let's say that he ended up of that $10 million estate. Let's say that the male was the malfeasor in this situation, and so he wasted $4 million, or he fraudulently transferred $4 million. So that leaves $6 million, right? Okay. I'm going to make those claims of waste and fraud and constructive fraud, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So without getting into all the legalese of that, we can just say that I'm going to make those claims, and then if the court finds in my client's favor on that, the court can do what is called reconstituting the marital estate, okay, which is a legal fiction. The court says that, hey, $4 million over here that was wasted and was fraudulently transferred, and we can't actually get our hands on it to bring it back into the estate. I'm going to treat it like we could. So now the marital estate is worth $10 million again, okay? And I'm going to give wife 55%. And for purposes of this explanation, we're just going to say it's all liquid, okay? So she gets 5.5 million, and husband gets 45%, which is really not the 4.5 million it would be. It is $500,000, okay?
Wow.
That's where you can run into trouble.
So this is the classic example of pigs get slaughtered from a greed perspective. I mean, if you're going to try to shelter it, you know that's going to happen. It's just like accept your fate that you're going to be giving up half, and that's how it goes in taxes. Now, if you wanted to, let's just say that you moved to a more favorable state. I don't know, what is the most favorable state in the country for divorce?
Oh man, I can't.
If you had to speculate,
I'll tell you what. Based on what the ruling was on the Chesapeake energy divorce, I would say Oklahoma didn't suck.
Okay.
You know, I mean, he got so Chesapeake. For those who don't know, I've forgotten the guy's name, but the guy who owned Chesapeake, okay, built it up. My recollection is that his wife had actually been in-house counsel with Chesapeake. I don't remember if she was actually general counsel or not. But in any case, they get married. It gets built up to somewhere around $16 billion in value. It goes to trial. She got an award of just shy of $1 billion. Okay. So he gets 15 billion.
I think he did pretty well.
He did pretty well. That would not have happened in Texas.
No.
You know, now I say that without, you know, getting into a community versus separate property analysis and not knowing what the facts are, but just assuming that everything would have been what we would term community, which is any asset or debt that is acquired during the pendency of the divorce.
Well, look at Mackenzie and Jeff Bezos. I mean, he did pretty well too.
He did.
I mean, what did she end up with? Like 75 million, somewhere in there? Or something about
Billion.
Billion?
Billion,
I know it was billion, sorry.
And
Yeah,
she's getting remarried to a dude who's a school teacher.
I was going to make a joke. I was wondering when the next billionaire school teacher is going to emerge in the Melinda and Bill Gates situation. So,
right.
What was that? Wasn't there something kind of unique about his relationship with an ex-girlfriend that you heard about?
I thought he was dating. He had been having an affair the whole time. So, you know, here's the other thing I don't know is if Washington, basically the state of Washington, reacts to stuff the way the state of Texas does, which is, you know, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. At that point, it's like, here's the example that I will give people. Once you get to a certain number, okay, unless I use the pilot analogy, if you are married to a pilot and he or she has a paramour in every city that they stay over, and they are just going to town with everybody, and they come home and give you an STD or a cafeteria plan of STDs, you know, unless you got that type of situation, you know, you're really not going to get something more than a 50-50 split very often, unless...
So infidelity really doesn't have a major impact unless it's a serial serial philanderer that gives the faithful spouse a everlasting present of sorts.
Once you get to a certain dollar number, it doesn't have a big impact on the division of the marital estate.
Where is that threshold? Dollar number.
North of 10, I would say. You know, it depends on the judge.
So this is why there's so many people that are just in the quote-unquote middle class who are just essentially saying, screw it, I'm just going to deal with an unhappy marriage because it makes them financially.
Yeah, but I mean, here's the thing. Let's say that you've still got, let's say that you've got an unhappy marriage, and so you have still been the philandering spouse, and you're in under $1 million. Okay, is it going to have an impact? Yeah. How much of an impact is it going to have? A few percentage points.
Okay, so it's relatively negligible.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's still small.
You're not going to see like a 70-30 split based on a philandering spouse.
You're never going to see a 70-30 split unless you've got, period,
Right.
unless you've got some kind of crazy set of circumstances going on. I mean, that just does not happen without a really crazy set of circumstances.
What about
now? There are plenty of crazy sets of circumstances.
That was my next question.
You know, so, but it generally is getting into that fraud scenario. I mean, and so, you know, if you know you're getting married or getting, you know what, actually, let's start there. If you know you're getting married and you've got money, get a freaking prenup, folks. You know, do that. You've got the ability to completely control what you are going to do as far as the marital estate. If you don't want to create any community property, you can set that up in a prenup so that you never do.
Do you hate when you find new clients getting divorced and they have a prenup? It probably just has to reduce. I mean, you probably like it from your client's perspective because if you're the protected prenup person, it's hard to do. But is that, I would assume it causes a lot less financial burden from an attorney perspective if you have a prenuptial agreement.
Typically, that is correct. Okay, so it needs to be really well drafted. Really well drafted. And one of the problems that you run into is some are not. Okay. Now, most of them now are smart in the way that they are done, in that they have a poison pill put in there of if you challenge it and you lose, you get nothing. Okay. And that happens. That happens. So you better think long and hard if you're going to challenge, you know, the prenup. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't look at and seek clarification on certain areas that are vague. And that is one of the problems that you can run into if they are drafted by a civil attorney rather than a board certified family law attorney.
Got it. Because
typically there are areas that you just don't think about, you know. Now there's some, I shouldn't say all the time, but there are some that and I've generally seen where they're over on the estate planning side a little bit as well, that are very, very good about that. And so they understand the difference between community and separate property, and they understand what provisions are really important and what are not. And some of them do it very well, but I would say that that is less rather than more, in my opinion. So it's a, that is something that is very important to have.
So in challenging a prenuptial agreement, let's just say, obviously based on your skills, you're able to identify where a prenup has vulnerabilities.
Sure.
What are some of those vulnerabilities? Obviously, case by case.
Yeah, it's all case by case, and it's, the biggest one is going to be if there's the intent to create any community, and how that community is created. A lot of the time, you will have provisions for a house account, so to speak, that pays for certain bills. Are things funded in? So a lot of the time, you're looking at not just the challenging of the prenup, okay, but you might be looking at, did people do what they were supposed to do under the terms of the prenup? So that's one thing to look at if you don't want to, take the risk of the poison pill. The other is, how was it signed? So there's certain things you should do if you have that. There has to be a proper disclosure of what the assets are, so you have a clear understanding of, where you could have some exposure and what you might be entitled to down the road on.
So if there's not an exhibit of an asset form, at least with
that's a problem.
Okay.
That's a problem. Also, don't do it the morning of. Give it to them the morning of and say sign it, or this ain't happening, honey. You know, that's a bad thing.
Sure.
That is a great way to look at duress and get it thrown out too.
That was my next question, was duress. Like, what about, call it the intelligibility of the spouse in terms of understanding the document? If it was, let's just say you can make the argument as a good divorce attorney that the spouse was, let's just call them the trophy wife or the trophy spouse to the husband that's very good looking but not very smart. They signed something, exactly. But they signed something they had no idea what they were signing. Is that a case that can be made?
It's a case that can be attempted to be made.
Okay.
So here's what most people do on a prenup is they're going to make sure that they had their own individual counsel that advised them of everything. That lawyer is probably going to have advised them in writing, don't sign this piece of shit. You're giving up an awful lot. To which they're going to go, no, but he or she would never do me like that. Mm-hmm. They would always do you like that. Okay, don't be confused about that.
True words.
Yeah. So they're going to run into that, and then typically when you sign this prenup, okay, not only do you have the signature page, but you have initialed on every single page, and you've got very clear language. I had every opportunity to meet with a lawyer and go through this word by word and ask whatever questions that I had, so that any questions I had about the impact of this on my property rights in the state of Texas were all answered. And so that I'm doing this of my own will, and nobody has forced me to do it, yada, yada, yada. At that point, you've got some issues.
Sure.
So then you're really looking at what the language is.
So that really just falls under the providing party's playbook in terms of execution risk.
Exactly.
So they have to make sure that they follow. Because I think for a lot of people, obviously if you're gonna hire the right family law board certified attorney to get the right process done, but how much time did you budget pre-wedding to get this stuff done?
I would be looking at this at least a few months beforehand.
At least a few months. Okay. Well, well, talk to me a little bit about, are there any situations you see where you have a spouse that, let's just say they start a business. You mentioned this idea where you have community property, great. Let's say they start a business and the other business partner doesn't want the risk of their business partner's wife coming in and divorcing, owning a quarter of the business.
Right.
Is there a way to protect that piece? Is something called a post-nuptial agreement?
So you can have post-nuptial agreements. I would also, yes, okay, and so we're kind of going into a number of different areas here.
Sure.
So you can do stuff, everything that you can do in a prenuptial agreement, you can do with a post-nuptial agreement. And a lot of times these things are just called marital property agreements.
Got it.
Okay, and or a premarital property agreement. And so you can do basically whatever you want. The one thing you really can't include in this is stuff about kids, okay, because that would be against Texas public policy, and so you can't include that. But you can include basically everything else you want to deal with as far as money goes in there. As far as protecting someone, you can do some of that in a prenup, but where you really have to do the legwork there is on the organizational documents of the entity itself. And so what you will see a lot of times is that, especially if it is a closely held corporation, and so there's an agreement on what the value of the company or what the value of the stock is, and so that upon death or divorce, the other parties have the right to, you can set a value on what the stock is that is just kind of relatively arbitrary if it's what everybody is agreeing at, and you have it as the way that one shareholder is leaving. You can value what those shares are. So for example, with a law firm, okay, a non-lawyer cannot own a part of a law practice, okay?
A PLC.
Any law practice, any law practice. So whether it's an LLP, a corporation, an LLC, doesn't matter. No non-lawyer can be a partner in that firm, which is what you would be making a spouse, okay? Or anybody that doesn't have a law degree, okay? So you can have what a buyout would be of the particular shares of that firm that is owned by that partner or that shareholder, or member of an LLC. And that's one way that you can do some of that. But the real creativity needs to come in the organizational documents rather than the post-nup there, as far as a poison pill going over there with that. Now, the other thing is you make sure that these are listed as your separate property, in a marital property agreement, so that it's very clearly defined and they've initialed everything and they've had the opportunity to talk to things. Let me talk though about one thing where when you get into these really, really big divorce cases, and something there where there's no prenup, where this kind of stuff gets interesting is like what you talked about with other companies, okay? And so assuming that all of this was created during their marriage, any company that was created by Bill and Melinda during that pendency would be community. So who's running it? Who's involved? Are they just passive? Do they just have passive involvement? Are they both just board members and other people are running the company? That can very possibly have an impact on what the division is, okay? Because like in Texas, a court can award it to one or the other spouse, or they can order it sold, or they can do what is called dividing it in kind, saying, great, I can't figure this out. Y'all each own 50% of it, which is a train wreck, but it's a great threat. It's like, it's basically saying, look, you
guys
freaks,
can't play nice.
You deserve each other.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to let y'all figure this shit out. And so, but an additional place where it can get really interesting is in philanthropic areas too. So
I was going to ask you about the foundation element, because they've already committed all of their money when they die to a foundation. So from a estate planning perspective, that's going to be a huge shakeup.
Yeah, now, so that's where it depends on how it is done, okay? So have they put things in a revocable trust or an irrevocable trust?
Well, I don't think you can gift billions into an irrevocable without paying a pretty significant tax bill. That would be shocking to me to have them do that during their lifetime. And you have a few strategies where you can leverage insurance, premium financing, things like that, to be able to bolster your gift when you pass away and do an irrevocable trust removed from your estate. But in my opinion, I think that's limited to maybe $500 million in that strategy.
Yeah, so I'm not even looking at the tax issue of
Sure.
that. I mean, and that's one thing, folks, I don't give any tax advice. That is above my pay grade, okay? But just from the creation of trusts, which is commonplace, and once you get to any asset level of substance, that's a great way to do a lot of planning there. But the question is, what has been placed in different trusts as well? Because I mean, if it's a revocable trust, those trusts can be what is called decanted. Okay, so you can have the assets taken back out.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, so only an irrevocable trust is where you run into issues with that.
Oh, I thought you said the other way around. So I was under the impression that a revocable trust is exactly what it is. You can't touch it.
No.
Irrevocable.
Irrevocable means you cannot touch it. A
Right.
revocable or revocable trust, you can get out of it. Okay, so people that get divorced all the time that have trusts that are revocable trusts, those are decanted. And the assets come out.
That was my fault. I thought you were saying irrevocable.
No.
You were saying revocable.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, I apologize.
Irrevocable.
So,
I didn't say it that way.
So the issue though, when you start getting into philanthropic things and having created, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, is what do you do from a foundation standpoint? Because they use the foundation to make these different gifts, right? So I heard someone talking, I think yesterday, talking about what they would imagine would happen in this case is they would just divide the foundation up, because otherwise you have to continue to work with the other party. And that's the same problem that you run into with closely held businesses, right? Generally, 99.9% of the time, you don't want to continue working with your former spouse. You know,
highly unusual.
Holy crap!
Glutton for punishment.
Yeah,
it's already hard enough to have a business partner that's basically marriage.
Yeah.
Then to add your ex-wife into your business partner marriage, that is a brutality.
Well, I mean, I probably, you know, everybody. Well, God damn it, I'm getting old, so I can't keep saying that. So I would say that most people, at least of my age, remember Bruce Willis and Demi Moore getting married, and then when they got divorced, they would go on vacations and stuff still together with the new spouse or with the new, you know, girlfriend or boyfriend. And I'm just thinking, why would you want to do that? I mean, that's just...
Well, I think the only caveat to that is there actually are a small subset of couples, call it, typically I'd say like mothers and fathers, that just kind of fall out of love slowly.
Yeah.
And then when they're done, they're still friends.
Yeah.
And they do like maybe holidays together with the family to make it easy. But I mean,
I can see that.
That makes sense.
I have done that.
Yeah.
I get along very well with my ex-wife. Very well. And we have done that, you know. And as well as we get along, I don't think either one of us really want to go on vacation with each other and our spouses. And I mean, it's just odd.
Yeah.
You know,
That's like some crazy ass 2020 co-parenting.
God bless you if you can do that and it works. But that would seem to me to be, it's kind of like the whole, one of the best things about a week on and week off possession schedule with kids is the amount of interaction between the parents is so limited, you know, because generally, you know, people don't get along that well. And so if you can keep them apart, you've got some of that same stuff with an expanded standard possession order where most of the exchanges are taking place at school. So the interaction between the former spouses is minimal.
Civil too.
Right. I mean, so that's the point. I mean, less is more in that situation.
Generally, you wouldn't piss on your ex if he was on fire.
Yeah, I mean, that happens. That happens. That was not me, by the way, folks. That was Mira.
Words of wisdom from Mira.
That's right.
You would generally not piss on your ex if they were on fire.
That's right. So
I like that one.
So so that's some of the stuff that you look into with the foundation stuff will be really, really interesting.
What about pets? How does that work? Because that's actually kind of an interesting concept. I'll tell you a quick funny interlude in my life. So my wife and I have been together for 8 years, but before she had very limited time between dating her ex and dating me. And I mean, extremely limited. We met and I was essentially the catalyst for her not being with her ex-boyfriend.
So you're that guy.
I'm just such an amazing guy. Now, there's no home wrecking to be had, but she was done with that relationship, and I was just the final push for her to get into something different. So my wife's probably super embarrassed if she's hearing this right now. So my apologies, Emily. But one of the funny things for us was that her and her ex-boyfriend had purchased a dog together.
Right.
And there was a sharing schedule that was going on for about 2 months, and I said, "Hey, me or the dog?" Because I'm not enjoying this interaction with a guy that, you know, you guys were not a good fit for one another, and I don't need him around your life to, you know, go down that path. So how does the pet work?
Well, I think what you just mentioned, a sharing schedule can be very common. So,
really,
you know, typically it's going to go to one or the other. Okay, whose dog or cat, you know, is it really? Did you buy the dog or cat before marriage? Because that'll control on that.
That's easy.
But if not, you know, I can tell you, I have written up possession schedules for animals.
For cats, gerbils.
Not gerbils, not gerbils. But that would fall into that same category.
Sure.
If someone is that passionate about a gerbil, you know, then
That's too funny. Well, let's talk about assets too, because I think the toughest part from a layperson's perspective in looking at potential divorce is that we get attached to some of our stuff.
Sure.
I'm not a very materialistic person, but there's a couple things where if I were to lose that item, I would be extremely upset.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's used as a spiteful tool sometimes.
Absolutely.
To try to possess other spots that you know that you'd never care about if you were in a happy marriage.
Right.
That's their thing. So I think one of the big things for me and for you too is you're a watch collector.
Yep.
I'm beginning my watch collection. And as we know, you can't just go to the AP store and buy a Royal Oak. You can't just walk into a Rolex AD and purchase a Submariner or a Daytona watch off the shelf. You have to be a wait list, and it's a really big deal to get a retail watch.
Yep.
So how do you go about protecting yourself for your assets without it? I mean, how do you position that the right way if you're not protected by prenup?
If you leave, take them with you.
Okay.
You know, or if you have a safe, put them in the safe and make sure that they don't go a-missing. Okay.
Got it.
So, you know, there's not anything that you can really do to protect that. I mean, because if it was bought during the marriage and it is not a gift, it's community. Okay. And so what happens on the division of personal property? Okay. So like we were talking about before, my general advice to my clients is, you know, don't get me involved in fighting about pots and pans. And that's generally what I classify all household goods, unless, or all personal property, unless you've got something that has a high value, like an expensive watch collection, if you've got antiques, if you've got expensive artwork, things like that. Those obviously can be worth fighting about because they're worth a lot of money. Typically, people are going to figure that out between the two of them. Okay. If they cannot, what will happen a lot of the time is it's a lottery system, okay? You pick, then I pick, then you pick, then I pick. So we just put all this shit out
fantasy
together.
Divorce.
Yeah, and it's you pick, then I pick. Okay. And so, you know, generally...
Is it an auction draft or a snake draft? How does this work exactly?
You know, I haven't seen anybody do a draft on the pets, but that's not out of the question.
That would be pretty funny, actually.
Yeah, so... Yeah,
well,
so it's unfortunate, but that's the way it happens.
I can only imagine that's going to be pretty insane. So I think that for us, it's one of those things where this might be a good segue into talking about alternative asset classes.
Yep.
Because we've talked quite a bit about divorce, but you know, as we either as single people or as married folks collect assets, I think one of the common lenses right now that we're facing is the idea that the US dollar might be fluctuating a bit on its stability, on its reign in the global market. So whether it be from pure conjecture or the reality that inflation is going to be creeping up more and more with how much money we're spending at a federal level, there's a limit to how much we can actually spend without devaluing our own currency. So I think that it'd be kind of fun to talk about what alternative asset classes are out there. And we mentioned watches.
Yep.
This is actually a really unique thing because I feel like in the last 2 or 3 years, the watch market, the gray market of watches, has just
huge,
been exponential. Like, talk to me about your retail experiences with watches, because that's pretty fun to talk about.
So luckily, I've got a relationship with a couple different places. One of which is not in state. That is a place that I go pretty regularly, I will say. And so, you know, you buy it out of state, you can save the sales tax on it when it's shipped. You know, I don't get to buy it and wear it there, but I get to buy it and ship it back to Dallas. And so, but exactly what you said is right. I mean, you've got to build a relationship with that particular brand, so to speak, and a particular individual, so that when they have stuff that so that orders can be placed for you, okay? But on top of that, when they get an allocation of certain watches, that you are on the list to call immediately upon certain things hitting their store. Because if you're not, it's not like it used to be, where you could just walk in and you would see all of this stuff lined up, you know, and you could pick what you wanted. It's not like that. And COVID has made it worse by a lot, simply because they shut all the manufacturing down. And so, for example, one thing, Rolex, who is the master on controlling supply.
Well, they're a nonprofit too, which is hilarious.
I did not realize.
Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, so it is a nonprofit company. And what's so funny about Rolex too is that you talk about these allocations. The U.S. is actually on the bottom of the allocation list. It goes U.S., then Europe, and then China. China gets like 70 or 60 or 70%. It's not published, this is speculative, but they get a majority of the allocation for Rolexes, which is insane.
Well, that doesn't typically, well, that doesn't surprise me a whole lot. I think there's been so much of, you know, you had the government folks in China and then everybody else, and now you've got that, you know, there's been a whole middle class and then an upper class.
It's been created.
The super upper class that has been created up there that have just been accumulating stuff. You know, you used to hear stories about cars in China where a family would go in together to buy a family vehicle, you know, so you would have it shared by 2 or 3 generations.
Wow.
And that's insane, you know, and so now it's, vastly different.
Well, speaking of Rolex too, another fun like little tidbit is that I was talking to a friend of mine who does a lot of like international luxury sales.
Yeah.
And he said that he was invited during Monaco, during the Grand Prix out there, to go on the gentleman who manufactured the dials for Rolex. This guy had a $300 million yacht.
Wow.
I mean, just because he just made one component of Rolex watches. That's how heavily paid he was. So I thought that was kind of fascinating. But
no kidding.
Reeling us back, the reason I brought up your watch collection, and like there's been this emergence in the past couple of years of we've been in a long bull market.
Yeah.
And I think that it's been pretty tough as an investor to look at 2020 from a business cycle perspective because we saw truly a recessionary environment. We saw peak to trough decline of over 30% in the markets, and that means that you've gone into a recessionary period.
Right.
But our recovery was only 2 months too, when the average recession was that long. So I think people are a little nervous. Was that a true recession? Was that a true reset? Are we going to be in another 5 to 6 year bull market? Who knows? That's what we all are around for in my business. But what I'm getting to in terms of are there any other creative kind of asset classes that you think would be fun, interesting to put your money in as a hedge against just having USD as your primary income?
Oh man, there's so many different things that you can get involved in. I mean, so you know, everybody's into the market. You talked about doing something with watches. Real estate is always a different one. I mean, so it depends on, I think, and you could probably speak to this better than I could, but where you are in your investing life. Okay, so looking at 2 different things: what your age is, how close you are into retirement. That is going to, I think, in my opinion anyway, should be a governing factor in the risk aversion that that you exhibit in your investing. And more people are just, some are risk averse and some are not. I mean, I am a risk taker and my wife is not. Okay, so real estate is great from creating. It's probably, you look at some of the wealthiest people and they all have a shit ton of real estate. Because while it might go down, traditionally it keeps going up and up and up. And then what kind of real estate are you in? Are you in residential? Are you into commercial? Are you into multifamily? Are you into different areas of commercial? So you've got stuff like strip centers, you've got logistics centers, you've got office buildings.
Single tenant.
Yeah, I mean, so there are a million different areas to go there. You can buy intellectual property portfolios. So one of the things that if anybody around our area noticed that Apple closed all of their Collin County stores a while back, the reason they did that is because they were tired of playing in the Eastern District of Texas on patent litigation.
Which is the most prolific patent troll place in the country, isn't it?
Yeah, there, and there's a rocket docket in Wisconsin and the Second Circuit up in New York. Those are the 3, but it was primarily Eastern District and Wisconsin that were real big on that. So they closed that to try to avoid being in the Eastern District anymore. But you can do that, and now there have been a number of laws that have come in that have, I think, cut back on some of that, and they continue to try to trim that. But that's another thing of the pendulum and the way that it swings. You got to be careful. It got way too far to the left on what the patent trolls could do, because they were buying shit that was incredibly old, but it still played a part in one little piece, say, of a transistor. Okay, and so they didn't get a royalty on that. So you had people buying the shit up that were going to get a royalty fee. So you got to keep taking a cut, keep taking a cut.
Yeah.
And at that point, eventually you cut into what the R&D budget is, and you stop innovation. So
yeah, patent trolls, that's something that we can talk a lot about, but we won't because it just makes me upset. I think that's something that's just such a scummy business, and it takes away the innovators like freedom to continue to generate technology that we need. It's frustrating. But I think just to talk about a few of the other assets that I find to be good salvages, you mentioned real estate.
Yeah.
One of the harder things to do has become easier in the past few years is going to be international real estate. So there are countries that are opening up more and more to allowing U.S. nationals to purchase property. Mexico, for example, I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago, you had to have a Mexican national to be able to purchase and own property. You could trust that person; they wouldn't just take it from you. So that's changed in Mexico. You've looked on in Belize, for example. I've helped clients look at places in Italy and in France. So I just think that as we become more of a globalized society and looking to the possibility that every empire has its end. And the United States has been a dominating force in the world for quite some time, and as other actors emerge to try to undermine it, there's going to be a necessity for wealthy individuals to have a diversification in their asset class from a USD perspective. And that's not just owning other currencies, that's owning gold's always interesting, but it's a pretty poor investment from a long-term perspective. It barely beats inflation from 1980 on. But cryptocurrency is something we'll talk about in another episode that I think is a phenomenal investment where leveraging a small piece of your portfolio today can be worth a tremendous amount in 10 years based on the frontier element of that market. And then even things like watches, shoes, bags. We've created this luxury good market that's completely tradable that I think is really fascinating.
What are the
Birkin bags? Yeah.
The Birkin bags, that's what I was thinking about, yeah.
Those are insane.
That's crazy.
20,000 to 50,000 a pop.
That's
if
crazy.
You get one.
Yeah.
You gotta get in line, you gotta put your name there, and it's like a 10-year waiting list.
So, and that's what, you were talking about with the gray market. So that's where, if I go and take, one of the watches, like the watch I'm wearing today, okay, I can take that and sell that for a significant profit on the gray market if I wanted to. And there are lots and lots of things out there like that. So it's an interesting time for what is happening in, with that. But I mean, traditional manufacturing and stuff is sucking air.
Consumer dynamics are just at an all-time bizarre transactional level because you've got a lot of older wealth people in the baby boomer generation who have hoarded cash, and they're still sitting on a lot of it. And the inflows in the market continue to just exhibit that there is going to be upward stock pressure. So people, bears are right like a broken clock 2 times a day. And I think that there's technical indicators becoming less and less involved, but the Shiller Cape is an example of that. So if you look at the Shiller Cape ratio, that is the price, earnings, and GDP compared to the X and Y axis. And in a typical Shiller Cape environment, that would be somewhere, I think it's like a 22 or 23 is the average number on that for all time, for like a normal market cycle. We're like a 60. So if that's the case, then we will see, a 65% decline in the indexes if it truly does correct down to the mean level. So no one likes to use this phrase, but we are experiencing what I would consider a paradigm shift in consumer behavior because we all have a lot of cash, but our government's spending a lot of cash. We're buying luxury goods like nobody's business. The real estate market is out of control. And those factors, yes, typically, if you look back at 2001, the stock, the tech bubble, that is a bubble factor. But the difference is that the leverage, at least on the consumer balance sheet, is not as great. So
I don't know. We got some issues right now with, one of the things that I think of, you hear GM is going back to open up a plant in Mexico after they had just moved it back because of all the tax shit that's going on now. I mean, that's insane what we were talking about with corporate taxes. We're going to go from being kind of middle of the road to one of the highest corporate tax rates now, and you think that is actually going to increase, jobs? I mean, it is the epitome of stupid. I just don't get it. I mean, how can you look at that and think that is a good idea? And so you're going to have, it's like the level of education that has gone up. So, it used to be you graduated from high school and you could go get a job that would support you and your family.
You could buy a home, you could buy a car.
Yeah, and then it became you had to have a college degree, and now it's become you really have to have a graduate degree. And so when you talk about there are people with lots and lots of cash, I mean, you're talking about people that are at the upper level of society, and it really creating a chasm with those that don't have that that educational level or have not been an innovator. It doesn't have to be tied to education.
I actually slightly disagree with that point for a couple of reasons. The first is going to be that you have, compared to, what was it, 80 to 100 years ago, 85% of the population was in pure poverty. Now it's 9%. So yes, there's always a constant dividing conversation about the income gap wealth that happens between the 1% and the rest of the world. But if you look at the median income in the United States of America, it's pretty bad. It's like $50,000 a year. However, there is still a pretty strong contingent of corporate workers that built up a sizable 401k.
That's true.
What I mean by that is that I'd say that if you made $100,000 to $150,000 of household income a year, and you were prudent with that and taking advantage of a company match and maybe putting 6% plus the 6% match, or call it 10 to 12% in your 401k, you're going to have over $1 million. And $1 million, in my opinion, is really not a lot of money from a lifetime perspective. But if that adds up across the balance sheet of the United States,
sure.
and a lot of baby boomers who were very, very risk on during 2008, who got creamed in those supposed safety vehicles, that's where the cash is on the sidelines.
Yeah,
it's like $2.6 trillion in cash on the sidelines still.
Yep.
So I think that I understand what you're saying, but there's also plenty of people that are still so sheepish, and I see that in my practice with. I don't have a whole lot of older clients, but the ones that are on a fixed income, they are a little scared right now.
Oh, yeah. I can understand that.
Yep.
I can
Wholeheartedly.
understand. Well, guys, this has been a good one. Thanks, Andrew, as always.
Thank you, Mark.
Fun one.
Engaging conversation.
Yeah, exactly. So celebrity divorces, they do happen, and get a prenup, folks.
Exactly. Thank you, Mira, as always.
It's not always cheaper to keep her.
That's true. That is true. And
Said by a woman.
the
Yes.
most important, why is divorce so expensive? Because it's worth it.
Shameless plugs.
There you go.
Group.
There you go.